Hey guys, Nick from STOLTEC MOTO. What do we have here today? Doing a little bit of trail and a little bit of MX track testing, I'll call it, on the Sirris Suspension. Actually, a couple things you'll see here, right? We're doing the F43 Fork, R46 Shock, and we also added a Scott's steering stabilizer. So, you're going to see us here on some of what I'll call the regular routine trails, all single track, a little bit of enduro, but mostly single track, your typical East Coast rocks routes. Unfortunately, we got this stuff on the bike late summer into early fall, so you're seeing a lot of leaves on the ground here. On the East Coast, we've also been tremendously dry this year. I don't know that it was quite as dry as it was last year, but we're still in a drought status. So the video you see here, the leaves are very light, fluffy, very dry, and the dirt under the leaves is very silty. There just hasn't been rain in weeks, so I mean, honestly, it's a little slippery. So there's certainly some videos we could show at a higher pace, maybe some more impressive speeds, but I chose this one because I wanted you guys to see how well the suspension is working. Now, I will say, full disclosure, that this has been after some testing and some coordination with Sirris. There's been some back and forth going with this. But what you'll see here, obviously, as I said, it's very slippery, but there's still an awful lot of confidence. And I will also say that the tires on this bike are quite old. There's quite a bit of tread left on the front, but it's a couple years old. And the rear tire was put on at the beginning of this season, but it's a gummy, and it looks like it's had a full season on it. So, I would call this kind of the worst case scenario for traction, right? Between the dry leaves, the lack of water in the dirt, the very silty soil, and frankly, even just having some of the rocks and roots hidden underneath the leaves, coupled with those tires, to me, it speaks volumes to how good this suspension is. So, anyway, I will say that we are on a 0.46 set of springs, actually a 44 and a 48, but the average comes out to 46 in the fork. Have not made any internal adjustments, just played with the clickers quite a bit. I will say, there's a placard that comes on the forks, and if you guys watch our other video, you'll see this, where it essentially tells you first 5 hours or so, make no adjustments, let the fork break in. It is a closed chamber fork, so there's more seals and O-rings, there's more parts than the open chamber fork, and it takes some time to wear in, which also includes the oil seals, the oil bushings, and that kind of stuff, right? So I will say that the shock, or excuse me, the fork was definitely very sticky for quite a while. And actually, that led me to contacting Sirris in the first couple hours on this stuff, because I was kind of convinced that there was something wrong with what you have. But it turned out that it did loosen up quite a bit. It just needed to be ridden. So some riding time. I mean, as you'd expect with anything new, it takes some time for things to wear in and to loosen up. So that did not disappoint. It definitely loosened it quite a bit, and I really honestly got happier and happier as I rode it more. So quite an improvement there. The suggested settings on the fork out of the factory, I think they were close. I purposely did not look at them when I set it up. I went my own way, as I typically do when I set things up, and I found that as I got to where I was happy, they tended to be pretty close, but I'm not exactly on the same suspension clickers. So what I would say is spend some time getting it done the right way. I think it's a good starting point to look at what they send you, but you're going to find some gains depending on how you ride, right? The riding conditions are going to have a huge impact. Your riding style, the trail conditions, the soil conditions, your tire selection, your speed, right? There's so many variables, as you guys probably already know. So spend some time with that. You spend a lot of money on the fork, on the shock. Don't stop with the suspension settings that they gave you. I think there's still room for improvement. So that's great. I think the fork is definitely something that I've really warmed up to. I never personally thought that the factory fork was terrible. You could certainly feel where it was not as refined and robust as some of the other offerings on the market, or I should say some of the other stock stuff that you'll find on more competent dirt bikes. But for the price point and for what it was, I was never really upset with it. So keep that in mind with these comments, right? But you're also going to see how I'm riding here. This is indicative of what the majority of the riding that I do on this bike looks like. As I said, it's all East Coast, rocks and roots, not terribly fast. There's not a lot of open sections here. I do a little bit of motocross, which I'll show at the end, but I mean a little bit. This is not my discipline. I didn't even touch a track until later in life, right? So the majority of my riding is done in the woods. It's what I like. It's what I enjoy. And yeah, that's kind of that. That's like the vibe here. So that being said, the fork is amazing. It was definitely something that showed a huge improvement right off the bat. It's very supportive. It's not harsh. I did find that where I previously had some arm pump is gone away. And this is a pretty good section of the video to watch here. So there's some off-camber hills. And I don't know that I necessarily have the right clip in here for you to see it, but there's a couple sections. And obviously the videos tend to flatten things out, unfortunately, but you're going to see a couple sections going downhill off camber where my arms would definitely pump up a little bit with the factory suspension. So the factory fork would definitely stiffen up as it heated up. So as the fork started to cavitate and as the pressure inside started to build, the fork would get really stiff, and it felt that way. I could feel it in my arms, and it just punished me. I'm happy to say with this fork, never had a problem. I can go much longer on this fork at a normal pace without feeling it. The off-camber piece here I think is interesting, right? Because getting back to those leaves, as you guys know who ride in the woods a lot, those off-camber hills, especially when you get rid of your traction, you end up losing the front sometimes. I'm quite impressed, both front and rear, with how well this bike tracks through those turns. Even with these leaves, it's quite impressive how much confidence I have in traction on both ends of this bike. I did spend a little bit of time on the rear. I found that the factory spring rate that was recommended by Sirris ended up being a little bit on the light side for my weight and my riding style. I would probably also say maybe my body composition. So with a short wheelbase bike like the Ultra Bee, and depending on the handlebar setup, the risers, and obviously what you weigh and your gear, it's going to have a major impact over how much weight you put to the rear. So I had to go up one spring rate, which made a huge difference. And you'll see here on the hill climbs, um, this is actually a trickier hill than it looks in the video. Um, it just tractors right up. No doubt the tubeless helps, the rear tire helps. I love my gummy tires, but I will say that just swapping out the shock with the proper spring makes a big difference. It just tractors. Here's a section that is pretty much a two-track Jeep trail, I'll call it. Hopefully the video is not too fuzzy here, but you can see there's a lot of baby heads, there's a lot of washes. This is pretty chunky here, but you can end up carrying some pretty good speed, and the bike just tracks really, really well. It maintains traction the whole time up these climbs. Much better, much better. Here's a rock face, a little bit more on the enduro side. That's about a 10, 12 foot high rock face. It's not completely vertical, but it's pretty close. The traction up that is just incredible. There was no slipping, no sliding. Here we are coming down another off-camber section, but crucially, there's an uphill that is quite clapped out. It's getting a little bony. The leaves, the rocks, the roots really didn't slow the bike down. You can kind of hear like the motor there just kind of whirring along, but traction was maintained. It's very, very confidence inspiring, and frankly, it's quite impressive. So, altogether, I think front and rear are really coming along. It took a little bit of tuning, but I'm quite happy with where we are. Another section here, very similar terrain, but another one of these like rock faces that, Again, it doesn't look like much on video, but with the wrong suspension, the wrong tire, it ends up being very chunky and very slippery. You can tell here, even these rocks coming down, it just tracks so smooth and so straight. All right, so now for some higher speed action here. You might be thinking, how is this going to work on something like a motocross track with that trail tune? It's not going to be as stiff, obviously, and I'm happy to say that it works really well for an amateur pace like my own. This is not my discipline, but compared to stock, it is so much more supportive. The wrong landing will not bottom you out. It's very stable, it tracks well, traction is excellent, but I definitely want to show you here closer to the end. There's a couple jumps that I take deliberately short and land flat, and then I take a bit of a huck off of a tabletop, and I'm pleased to say that the suspension eats it up. The hydraulic lockout completely absorbs it. It's very easy on my body. The bike felt great. It could still take some more. So at any rate, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop a comment down below. We're happy to help. Until next time, ride safe, guys.